Where are the free speech warriors today? The hypocrisy is obvious to the American people. You are showing who you all are, really.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Omar will not be silenced.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Congressman Omar,
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
That our country is failing you today through this chamber. You belong.
The gentlewoman is no longer recognized, and the gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Don't tell me that this is about a condemnation of anti-Semitic remarks when you have a member of the Republican caucus who has talked about Jewish space lasers and an entire amount of tropes, and also elevated her to some of the highest committee assignments in this body. This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America. Don't tell me, because I didn't get a single apology when my life was threatened. Thank you.
My colleagues, I stand before you as a proud Jew. And my colleagues, I stand
I don't know why it
before
rebooted
you
there.
as a proud Jew.
People, this is government.
And a proud friend and colleague of Ilhan Omar. I don't need any of you to defend me against anti-Semitism. My friend Ilhan Omar.
Isn't that just what AOC was just doing 2 seconds ago by calling other? The incongruity of all of this. Hold on, I'll let it finish before I.
We have worked together to the values that I treasure as an American Jew and that she treasures. My colleagues, I stand.
Okay, we're going to end that. Look, this has nothing to do with what we're going to be talking about tonight, but I figured it might be the only moment of levity that we're going to have the entire evening. Levity through insanity. I mean, listening to that, if anybody watches those individuals, and they were not the only ones, but they were by far the worst that I saw. If anybody watches those three individuals and looks at the government and sees anything less than unhinged hypocrites, we're watching the same screen, but appreciating two different films. And I prefer my analysis to yours. Incidentally, just so we're all clear, they're talking about removing Ilhan Omar from the House Intelligence. No, it was the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It's an attack on women of color, people. All three of those women that you saw blowing their gaskets, throwing conniption fits, all three of them voted Marjorie Taylor Greene off of her House committee functions. But that's different with a capital D. But I know this is not intended to be about politics tonight. It's not intended to be about government, although it is, because just bear in mind the three lunatics that we just witnessed right there, they are in the government, and they may not be the worst, but they're pretty much tied with all the other members of government. And that's a bipartisan critique, by the way. Like there's some that are better than others, but that's the government. Those are the people that are governing you, me. Well, I'm from Canada, but I'm living here now, so those are the people that are governing us. Plato or Aristotle or Socrates, I forget whom, said, the price for not getting involved in politics is you end up being governed by your inferiors. Okay, and we are indeed being governed by our inferiors. Now, let me just make sure that we are actually currently live on Rumble. The Sunday night stream, Viva Barnes Law, is going to be tomorrow night because Barnes is in transit. Probably the same thing for next week because it's the Super Bowl and some people are still into that. Tonight, we've got a guest, someone who I'm going to interview, someone we're going to talk to, because I ran a poll in my Twitter sphere last week. Who knows who Maggie DeGarry is? Like, just unloaded, open question. Who knows? People know who Tiffany Dover is, although I'm not sure how many would have answered yes or no to that question. Maddie DeGarry. Who knows? The poll got 25,000 respondents, give or take. 75% of the respondents in my Twitter sphere did not know who Maddie DeGarry is, which I found to be not shocking in a judgmental sense, surprising in an educational, informative sense. Like, we're all heavily involved in what's been going on for the last 3 years. And to be as heavily involved as some of us are, emotionally invested, politically invested, spiritually invested, to not know who Maddie DeGarry is, that will have to be remedied, and we're gonna start tonight. So I've been watching interviews with Sephanie DeGarry. This is Maddie DeGarry's mother. A few of them over the weekend, reviewing a lot of the paperwork evidence that Stephanie sent me over the weekend. Maddie Garay was one of the children involved in the Pfizer clinical trials back in December 2020. Maddie Garay, according to Stephanie and according to medical records, suffered what can only be definitively concluded to be an adverse reaction in the clinical trials. And how Pfizer, how the clinical trial, whomever was taking care of that, dealt with this, everything about this is going to shock your conscience. And why is it so important? Imagine if at a time when we get locked down 2 weeks to flatten the curve in March 2020, and miraculously by December 2020, government scientists have managed to find a vaccine for a coronavirus within 9 months, when they had yet been able to decode this mystery for decades. I think decades is not an exaggeration. And they did it with a brand new technology that had never been used before. Ask Albert Bourla himself, mRNA technology, messenger RNA technology, in 9 months. And they run clinical trials. And imagine what would have happened had they had to deal with potential alleged adverse events in those clinical trials. Imagine what would have happened to vaccine intake had the story of Tiffany Dover, one of the nurses who apparently had something of a fainting reaction, if you believe one narrative, or much worse if you believe another. Imagine what that would have done to global vaccine intake. Imagine what would have happened there, if you want to just put your tinfoil hats on for a bit. And so what happened? Well, we know what happened with Tiffany Dover. NBC, whatever, one of those crap news networks, did a 5-part podcast miniseries, which raises more questions than answers. But the fact that people don't know who Maddie Garay is, you'll be shocked. Okay, so what's going to happen now? I'm bringing in Stephanie. I see her in the background. That's her mother. And I told Stephanie beforehand, I ask a ridiculous amount of questions. None of them are intended to be nosy, intrusive, the opposite of exhibitionist, whatever that is. None of it is intended to be crass, disrespectful, or exploitive. I ask a lot of questions, and I'm going to, because I've listened to some interviews and I know which questions I would have asked and want to ask. And that's what we're going to do tonight. So, Stephanie, I'm bringing you in 3, 2, 1. All right. Stephanie, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
As
good as can be.
We're going to leave it like this. Yeah, no, I every time I listen to, you sent me some material and I hear people ask you, how are you doing? Or how are you? Under the circumstances and knowing. Okay, we're going to start from the very, very beginning of all of this. I've given the 30,000-foot overview. Who are you? Your husband, family, where are you from? What do you do in life? We're not going to go too far into it because it's not irrelevant, but, leading up to December 2020, who are the Garays?
So we live in the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio, very close to Cincinnati Children's, which has always been regarded by everybody around here as like an elite hospital. I previously was an electrical engineer and had left that industry. I worked in industrial automation just because I traveled a lot, wanted to spend more time with my kids. This was before COVID, and started subbing and ended up being an educational assistant with special ed in an elementary school. My husband was a medic in the Army, went to nursing school, but because of my job, traveled around, ended up only getting his LPN because you can't hop around colleges, that up from LPN. Right. So he also was a project manager prior to that. So what he does right now is a combination of his medical side and his project management side. So he does a lot of analytics for the company that he works for right now in their medical department. We have three kids. Right now, my oldest, Gabe, is 18. Our middle son, Lucas, is 16, and Maddie is now 14.
Okay. So all that to say, suffice to say, educated, working parents.
Normal, boring people.
Since I'm not sure, I've been to Ohio, but I've only very briefly. I think, my brother once upon a time went to Oberlin back when it was crazy back in the day. Only to have gotten more crazy. Okay, so I mean that's enough of the backdrop of the family wise. So timeline in this entire story it's crucial, but it's also somewhat complicated.
Mhm.
How did you and the family get involved in the clinical trials for we're going to call it the jab. I'm not calling it the V
Right.
word.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in this?
So back in, I guess it was July or August of 2020, I found out one of our friends who worked for Cincinnati Children's was in the trial. And at that time, I myself signed up. And I had sent you the emails confirming that. I didn't realize at the time, but it was actually, there were two different trials that I ended up signing up for. One was the AstraZeneca and the other was Pfizer. I never got called in for either of them. I just assumed that, they had too many people that volunteered. I don't know. I'm assuming with the AstraZeneca one that it just got stopped because they no longer, like they didn't even release it in the US. So I had also sent you the email that I sent to my husband saying, hey, and I don't want to call out the person because I don't want to blame that person. It's just like ties everything together. So I said, hey, this, our friend is in the trial. It looks like low risk. She had already gotten both doses, didn't have any issues, was confirmed that she had gotten the actual jab. And I said, it looks like low risk, high reward. Because my kids, for me, it was getting us out of the pandemic. And I know a lot of people criticize me for not doing my research, but there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of research out there. And it was being preached that this was our way out of the pandemic. My kids were suffering from, like, they hated being home and not being able to see their friends. So that that happened. Fast forward to December, and my son came home.
Actually,
Okay.
let me stop you there. So this is, I guess when they announced the clinical trials, it was give or take, I forget the month, but it's shortly before December of 2020.
For the 12 to 15-year-old trials, yes, not for the adult trials. They were earlier.
And
Right.
now, like, just to explain to us what was your living experience like during COVID itself? The world gets locked down in March 2020.
Right.
What are your kids doing? Your kids at the time now
Mhm.
are do the math.
Online learning. I mean, I was working at a school. Well, actually, at the time I was subbing, so I no longer. We all were home. Everybody was at home. My son, even, when Maddie got her second dose, it was his 16th birthday, and there was no party because people are afraid to have a party. So I mean, we were at home. We tried to have fun. We did lots of things together. But you know what? My kids were 12, 14, and 15 at the time when they entered the trial. And that's like their teenage years. Like, it's so important at that time for them to be social. And they worked around it. They played online video games and did things like that to get around it. But still, it's like you need that social interaction face to face. And people just you couldn't do it. They were miserable. Every kid was miserable. I work in an elementary school and I see how it's affected kids. Every kid. I don't care who it is. They need that. They lost out on that. This is like destroyed our kids. So for me, it was a way out of this to say, hey, the way they presented it to us, hey, once you have this, you're safe. So once you're safe, you can go out and have a life.
And I'll field one question that I know you get, which is, to the how could you have done this type question.
Mhm.
I'll say one thing, like when I was growing up, and you always hear these, they're not called clinical trials, but in Montreal, I forget what they were called. You'd hear the ads on the radio, participate in a test, and you'll get paid, whatever. And it's money on the one hand, but not really.
It's not a lot of money.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
and you operate on the basis, and I'll never do that again, that well, what's the worst that can happen? This is not like testing in the sense of like that facility in Japan during World War II. It's not like random, let's random experiment on humans. You take for granted that you're within a realm of safety to begin with, and that the adverse effects are going to be headaches, sore arm, fatigue, and whatever. And we're going to get into what they told you. So to those who say, how could you? I think a lot of us operated in a world where we presumed a lot more good faith and we presumed a lot more transparency than we'll ever do again. And the tragedy is that some have to suffer to show us this reality that, my goodness, you know, what they tell you and what the reality is are two very different things.
Right.
So, you know, so after now it's like 9 months of lockdown, whatever, you find out that they're doing the trials on the kids because they had done the adult trials earlier.
Mm-hmm. And we had a friend that was in the trial and she had no issues. And I guess, so first of all, I never would have considered putting my kids in any trial ever. This was the first time they ever were in one. And I did not even ask them to be in it. I volunteered myself earlier on. The same parent had her son participate in the trial for 12 to 15-year-olds. And he was talking about it at school. My son came home and he said, hey, X, and I don't want to say his name, is in the COVID jab trial, you know, and I want to do it too. So for him, it was his ticket out to have a life. And a bunch of him and his friends, they all were in the trial. So I knew an adult in the trial and I assumed, hey, if somebody got injured by this by now with the adult trial, because there were a lot of people in the adult trial, that we would have known by now. That's what I assumed. So this was not a small, like in Cincinnati, Ohio, there were a lot of adults and kids that were in this trial. Okay. So it wasn't like one of those small satellite locations. And this was somebody that was very well respected, educated, that was in the trial, put her son in it. She has a special needs child. So like she did her, like I assumed she did her homework and she probably did, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, he came home, asked about it. I sent you the email that she had sent to my husband saying, hey, X said that Lucas wanted to be in the trial. Here's the information. My other kids, Maddie and Gabe, heard about us talking about it and said, we want to do it too. And that's how they ended up on the trial. Even though I myself volunteered, I didn't get to be in it. I did not ask them. And I know I did consent and I regret it every single day. People beating me up is not going to help the bigger problem. Like it's not, like you're just making it so more people, because there are a lot more kids that were injured and a lot of parents that I've talked to whose parents won't speak up because of exactly what's happening to the people that are speaking up. So I just want to make that clear. Like, what side are you on? Am I the enemy, or is Pfizer, Moderna, the government, and et cetera, the enemy? Like, who do you just attack the right enemy? I screwed up. I'm admitting it. I deal with it every day. I cry every day. Like my life, like my daughter's life is miserable. It's affected our whole family. Like, just stop it. Just stop it. You're not helping anybody. And if you think you're a good Christian for doing it, you're not. You're not a Christian.
It's not just that. It's like,
it's not nice. It was not helping.
No, and it's like it was an environment where nobody could fathom the risks, and it was the patriotic thing to do, and
right.
and what
and I thought I knew enough that it was safe. I knew somebody in it. She felt it was good enough that she put her son in it.
No, and what's not that it's unfair and it's unproductive, but it's mostly unfair because everybody who purports to have known more at the time, you know, we use our knowledge now and then retroactively apply it. There's no one had a concept. Now, sure, and also people undermine or downplay or forget the absolute terror that everybody was in. And
yeah,
it's not just a valid. The internet is a bad place just because you'll get it you'll get it from people who are not genuinely believing it but know that it upsets you, and they use it as a tactic to try to silence you.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's and people have to also appreciate, although some
it won't
people
work.
do. Well, no, but it might work on others, and in which case we're actually having an underrepresentation of people speaking out about what their true stories are. It's not just that there's no judgment. It's people need to understand and empathize with the actual meaning of hot empathy, which is, but for the grace of God, this could have been any one of us, and so you have to deal with that. And I don't know how people deal with it. It's the internet is unforgiving and merciless, but then there's the other side of it, which is the good side, and then there's humanity, which actually exists beyond the internet ways. But we're going to get into this. So we're going to get into the actual trial process. You have a friend, educated friend, who probably also got through it unscathed. And you say, okay, well, the kids want to do it. The kids are excited. Everybody feels like they're being patriotic. They're going to help humanity.
A whole group of friends. It wasn't,
and what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, well, that's the point. Like for me, in my mind, if anything were to happen, like at that point, it's like I would want it to happen then, because then you'd have all the doctors there. They would do everything they could to figure it out. Like they would get better care than if it happened, if you had a reaction outside of it. But that is not what happened at all.
So now, what was this process like? Like, if people on the channel, we've talked about the Brooke Jackson whistleblower lawsuits, her experience with these Pfizer trials. Brooke has not
very accurate, very accurate.
She hasn't come on directly yet, but Robert Barnes,
right. I've talked to I know Brooke. So it's everything that she said is accurate. Like she was the confirmation of what, I had my viewpoint as like my kids being participants in it. And she had the viewpoint from the other side. And she is 100% accurate. Like so many things were unorganized and it wasn't, yeah.
Okay, so you know what we're going to do now? Everyone who's watching on YouTube, we're going to end it here, and I'm going to go to Rumble, and then I'm going to put the entire interview on YouTube tomorrow. So move on over to the Rumble platform. Links are there. So I'm going to end this in 3, 2, 1. Remove from